Is it empathy? I wish it were so. I have sat on a seat on the opposite side, thinking of their plight and giving out my considerations with compassion. I have shed tears of sorrow for them. In other cases, I have cried with them. Words that came out of my mouth were ones of solace, comforting their grief that struck deep into their hearts. I was a fool to believe that kindness was a merry-go-round. I felt their pain as if it were my own. Their tale felt like mine as I defended them from oppressors, claiming they did not understand, judging them, saying, "You should put yourself in their shoes." Who was I to think they would do the same for me? Who was I to think they could put themselves in my shoes and feel my pain? They showed me no mercy, no compassion. No one defended me from my own oppressors. In fact, they joined them, ganging up on me when I was in my defeated state. There was no comforting voice to soothe my grief, no words of compassion that came my way. I felt alone, with no one to lean on, or even give a helping hand. I admit, I was raised differently. My earliest memories are stitched together with threads of compassion, woven by the hands of my parents and elders who believed that kindness was not just a virtue but a duty. My mother's voice, soft yet firm, carried the weight of generations. We rise together or we fall apart. She repeated it often, sometimes while kneading dough, sometimes while tending the garden, sometimes while cradling me after a fall. To her, kindness was not optional, it was the very air we breathed. My father, though sterner in demeanor, reinforced the same creed. He would say, a hand extended in kindness is never wasted, even if it is not taken. He believed that generosity was a seed, and though some seeds fell on barren soil, others would sprout in unexpected places. His lessons were not delivered in lectures but in actions, sharing food with neighbors, repairing a stranger's broken fence, offering counsel to those who had lost their way. I watched him, wide-eyed, believing that this was the natural rhythm of life: give, and it shall be given back. Growing up, the community around me echoed these teachings. In our village, doors were rarely locked, and meals were often shared. If one family slaughtered a goat, the aroma of roasted meat drifted into every home, and portions were carried across fences. If one child fell ill, mothers gathered herbs, fathers fetched water, and siblings took turns watching over the patient. It was a web of mutual reliance, a tapestry of empathy. I thought the world beyond our village would be the same. Children were taught early that strength was collective. When we played, we lifted each other over fences, pulled each other out of muddy ditches, and shared marbles or sweets without hesitation. To hoard was shameful, to share was noble. Teachers reinforced this ethos, praising cooperation over competition, reminding us that a single broomstick breaks easily, but a bundle is unbreakable. I internalized this metaphor so deeply that it became the lens through which I viewed humanity. Yet even in childhood, cracks appeared. I remember lending my favorite doll to a friend, trusting she would return it. Days passed, then weeks, and when I asked for it back, she laughed and said, "It's mine now." I was stunned. My mother told me gently, sometimes kindness is mistaken for weakness. But don't let that stop you from being kind. I nodded, but the sting remained. It was my first lesson that not everyone shared the same creed. Another time, during a school race, I slowed down to help a classmate who had fallen. I thought the teacher would praise me, but instead she scolded me for not finishing strong. My classmates mocked me, saying I was foolish to sacrifice victory. I went home confused, torn between the values of my upbringing and the harshness of the wider world. My father reassured me, the race of life is not about speed but about who you lift along the way. His words comforted me, but I began to sense that the world beyond our home did not play by the same rules. As I grew older, the lessons became heavier. My parents often gave away what little we had. I remember nights when our family ate thin porridge because the better portion had been sent to a neighbor in need. My father would say, better to sleep hungry knowing another sleeps full. I admired his conviction, but I also felt the gnawing hunger in my belly. I wondered silently if kindness was worth the cost. Church sermons reinforced the message, love thy neighbor as thyself. I took it literally, believing that to love meant to suffer alongside others, to carry their burdens as if they were mine. I became the child who defended classmates from bullies, who shared notes with those who struggled, who gave away her lunch to the hungry. Teachers praised me, parents admired me, and I felt righteous. Yet deep inside, I longed for someone to do the same for me. In adolescence, my belief in kindness solidified into idealism. I wrote essays about empathy, spoke passionately in debates about compassion, and dreamed of a world where no one was left behind. I believed kindness was a merry-go-round, push it forward, and eventually it would swing back to you. I imagined myself surrounded by friends who would defend me as fiercely as I defended them, comfort me as tenderly as I comforted them. It was a beautiful dream, and I clung to it. But reality was harsher. When I stumbled, when I faltered, when I needed support, the merry-go-round did not swing back. Instead, I found myself alone, mocked, or even betrayed by those I had once shielded. The lessons of childhood, so noble, so pure, suddenly felt like chains binding me to disappointment. I began to question whether my parents had raised me wrong, whether their creed of mutual support was a relic unsuited for the modern world. Looking back now, I see those childhood lessons as both blessing and curse. They gave me a heart that feels deeply, a spirit that longs for connection, and a voice that defends the vulnerable. But they also made me vulnerable to exploitation, blind to betrayal, and slow to recognize selfishness. I was trained to give, but not to guard. I was taught to extend my hand, but not to withdraw it when bitten. Yet I cannot dismiss those lessons entirely. They shaped me, carved me, defined me. Even in my disillusionment, I recognize their beauty. The world may not honor kindness, but kindness itself remains noble. My parents' teachings were not wrong, they were simply incomplete. They taught me how to give, but not how to protect. They taught me how to share, but not how to discern who was worthy of sharing with. They taught me how to sacrifice, but not how to survive. I remember the first time I defended someone at the cost of my own peace. A friend accused of failure, mocked by peers. I stood tall, shielding them with words, insisting that mistakes were human, that dignity should not be stripped away so easily. They thanked me with trembling lips, promising they would stand by me if ever the tables turned. When the tables did turn, when I was the one accused, they were silent. Worse, they laughed with the crowd. Their promise dissolved like sugar in water. That was the first betrayal. But not the last. Here I am, alone, down, disgraced, and hiding in the shadows. The fall was not sudden, it was gradual, like a candle burning itself out, flickering until the flame surrendered to darkness. I had once stood tall, a defender of others, my voice steady and strong, my compassion unshaken. But betrayal is a slow poison, and over time it seeped into my veins, weakening me until I could no longer stand. The shadows became my refuge. They wrapped around me like a cloak, concealing my wounds from the eyes of those who had once called me friend. At first, I resisted them, longing for the light I had always trusted. But the light was cruel. It exposed me, mocked me, and magnified my pain. In the shadows, at least, I could breathe without judgment. Darkness is not empty, it whispers. It whispers of failures, of betrayals, of every kindness wasted. It replays the faces of those I defended, now turned against me. Their laughter echoes in the corridors of my memory, sharp as knives. I hear their voices saying, "You should have known better. You should have guarded yourself." And I realize they are right. The dissent is not only external, it is internal. My mind became a battlefield. Doubt clashed with hope, despair wrestled with resilience. I questioned everything, my upbringing, my values, my worth. Was kindness truly strength, or was it weakness disguised as virtue? Was empathy a gift, or a curse? These questions haunted me, circling endlessly, offering no answers. I remember nights when sleep refused to come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of silence pressing down on me. The shadows crept into my room, filling the corners, reminding me that I was alone. Tears came easily then, not the tears of compassion I once shed for others, but tears of exhaustion, of grief, of betrayal. The descent stripped me of illusions. I saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, the selfishness of those I had once admired. I saw how they fed on my strength, consumed my kindness, and discarded me when I was no longer useful. They were not companions, they were parasites. And I, blinded by empathy, had allowed them to drain me. Yet even in the shadows, a part of me resisted complete surrender. There was a flicker, faint but stubborn, that refused to die. It whispered back to the darkness, "You may have me now, but I will rise again." That flicker was not hope, it was defiance. It was the raw instinct to survive. The descent taught me survival in ways the light never could. In the shadows, I learned to stand without applause, to breathe without validation, to heal without witnesses. I learned that solitude is not emptiness but strength. I learned that silence can be a sanctuary, not a prison. I began to see the shadows not as enemies but as teachers. They taught me boundaries. They taught me discernment. They taught me that kindness must be guarded, rationed, and directed wisely. They taught me that not everyone deserves empathy, and not everyone is worthy of sacrifice. The descent was painful, but it was also transformative. It stripped me of naivety, burned away illusions, and forged resilience in the fire of betrayal. I emerged scarred, yes, but also sharpened. My voice, once soft with compassion, grew firm with conviction. My heart, once open to all, learned to close its doors to the unworthy. Here I am, walking in the shadows, but no longer meek. I am cautious, deliberate, and strong. The darkness no longer frightens me, it empowers me. I see now that the light is not always good, and the shadows are not always evil. Both are necessary. Both reveal truths. The descent was not my end, it was my beginning. It was the crucible that reshaped me, the storm that stripped me bare, the silence that taught me to listen to myself. I am no longer the martyr, no longer the blind giver. I am the survivor. And though I walk in shadows, I carry within me a flame that no betrayal can extinguish. It is hard to believe that it took me being trampled on the ground, walking with the shadow, for me to see what goes on in the light. To realize those who walk in the light were kindness-sucking succubi that deserved nothing from me, not my kindness, my strength, nor my strong will. They did not deserve it. Yet, a blind fool gave it to them, and they consumed me whole. Kindness, I learned, is not a merry-go-round. It does not spin back to you simply because you pushed it forward. It is a currency that others spend freely but rarely repay. Rebuilding is not a sudden act. It is not the dramatic rise of a phoenix from ashes, nor the triumphant march of a warrior returning from battle. It is quieter, slower, more fragile. It begins in whispers, in small choices, in the trembling decision to stand when sitting feels safer. When I first began to rebuild, I did not even call it rebuilding. I called it surviving. I told myself, one more day. One more step. One more breath. That was enough. I had no grand vision of strength, no blueprint for resilience. I only had the will to keep moving, even if the movement was imperceptible. As my strength replenished, I realized it was not infinite. It was precious, like a golden egg, fragile and irreplaceable. I began to guard it fiercely. Where once I gave freely, now I rationed. Where once I poured myself out, now I measured carefully. People called me selfish, but I knew better. Selfishness is hoarding what you do not need. Guarding is protecting what you cannot afford to lose. I learned to say no. At first, the word felt heavy on my tongue, awkward, almost rude. But with practice, it became liberating. Each no was a brick in the wall of my rebuilding, a boundary that kept the parasites at bay. I told myself, I will stand tall on my own. I will hold myself up. I will defend myself and console myself when need be. These were not just affirmations, they were survival strategies. I began to practice self-consolation, speaking to myself with the same tenderness I once reserved for others. I whispered, "You are enough. You are strong. You will rise." At first, it felt strange, almost pathetic, to comfort myself. But over time, I realized that self-consolation was not weakness, it was strength. It was the recognition that I could be both the wounded and the healer, both the fallen and the one who lifts. Solitude became my training ground. In solitude, I learned to listen to my own voice, to trust my own instincts, to value my own presence. I discovered that silence is not emptiness but clarity. It strips away the noise of others' opinions, leaving only the truth of your own heart. I began to relish solitude, not as isolation but as sanctuary. I lit candles, brewed tea, and sat with my thoughts. I journaled, pouring out grief and hope onto paper. I walked alone, feeling the rhythm of my steps as a reminder that I was still moving forward. Rebuilding required me to reframe kindness. I had once believed it was a merry-go-round, spinning endlessly, returning to me as I gave to others. Now I saw it differently. Kindness is not circular, it is linear. It flows outward, and sometimes it returns, but often it does not. I decided that kindness must be intentional, not automatic. It must be directed toward those who value it, not wasted on those who exploit it. I began to ask myself, does this person deserve my kindness? Will they honor it, or consume it? These questions became filters, protecting me from repeating old mistakes. The first time I defended myself against criticism without crumbling, I celebrated. The first time I walked into a room without fear of judgment, I smiled. The first time I comforted myself through tears, I felt proud. These victories were not grand, but they were milestones. Each one was a step upward, a sign that the descent had not destroyed me completely. I began to see rebuilding as architecture. My childhood lessons were the foundation: compassion, empathy, community. My descent was the demolition: betrayal, disillusionment, solitude. Now, rebuilding was construction. Each boundary was a wall. Each act of self-consolation was a window. Each moment of resilience was a roof tile. Slowly, I built a house within myself, a house strong enough to shelter me from storms. This house was not open to all. I locked the doors, guarded the keys, and invited only those who proved worthy. It was not selfishness, it was survival. As I rebuilt, others noticed the change. They called me selfish, cold, distant. They tried to guilt me into returning to my old ways, to pouring myself out for them. But I recognized their tactics as peer pressure, a manipulation designed to reclaim the benefits of my vulnerability. I refused. I told myself, they already took enough from me. They will not take any more. Each refusal was a reinforcement of my walls, a strengthening of my resolve. One of the hardest lessons of rebuilding was learning to console myself. I had always relied on others for comfort, believing that empathy must come from outside. But now, I discovered that self-consolation is possible, even powerful. I spoke to myself kindly, wrote letters to my future self, reminded myself of past victories. I became both the wounded and the healer, both the mourner and the consoler. It was not easy, but it was necessary. Only from the ground, looking up, do you realize the truth: kindness is not a merry-go-round. It is like clouds, beautiful, shifting, but impermanent. It separates, disintegrates, and disappears into the blue sky. From the ground, I saw clearly. I saw the futility of expecting reciprocity, the danger of blind empathy, the necessity of boundaries. I saw that rebuilding required not just strength but wisdom. Curious who I am now? They call me kindness. But I am no longer the kindness they knew. I am kindness sharpened, kindness guarded, kindness that no longer bleeds for the unworthy. My kindness is no longer a currency to be spent freely, it is a treasure to be shared wisely.